Let's start with an idea, a really challenging one. What if the path to a pure, rational faith isn't about adding more books, more rules, more layers of tradition, but about getting back to the absolute clarity of just one? That's exactly what we're going to explore, using logic and evidence.
So it all boils down to this one really powerful question. What if the traditions we've been taught to follow for centuries are actually built on a foundation of pure doubt? It's a heavy question, I know, but it's one that demands we investigate with a clear and critical mind.
And, this isn't just a friendly suggestion. It's a direct command from the scripture itself. It makes it absolutely clear. Faith can't be based on just blindly accepting what you're told. It has to be built on knowledge, on evidence, and on reason. This is our core principle, the lens we're going to use to look at everything else.
So what this all means is that your faith has to start with your own mind, your intellect, your God-given ability to think critically. That's the main tool you've been given to find the truth. The book itself is constantly telling you to think, to reflect, to question, which is the total opposite of just following tradition without thinking. And this leads to an incredible conclusion. The real language of the Quran isn't just Arabic, it's logic. Okay, so if we're gonna stick with reason as our main tool, the next logical step is to turn that tool onto the other sources people use for guidance. We're about to dig into the case against the collections of Hadith, the supposed sayings and actions of the Prophet, and you're gonna see why their reliability is, to put it lightly, on very shaky ground.
Just look at this timeline. That number, 230, that should just jump out at you. That's how many years went by between the death of the Prophet and when the most famous Hadith collector, Bukhari, even started his project. For over 2 centuries, these stories were just passed down by word of mouth. I mean, imagine a game of telephone, but instead of a few minutes, it lasts for generations. How could things not get distorted?
And the sheer scale of this problem? It's just mind-blowing. Bukhari himself supposedly collected something like 600,000 different narrations. And out of that enormous pile of stories, he reportedly threw out over 99% of them. He considered them unreliable, fake, or just straight-up fabrications. Let that sink in for a second. 99%.
So this brings us to a really simple, common-sense question. Let me ask you this. If you knew the well you got your drinking water from was 99% contaminated, would you even think about drinking that last 1%? Would you risk it? Of course not. The whole source is compromised, and that fundamental, massive doubt hangs over the entire collection.
And you really have to stop and ask, why? Why would people just make stuff up? Well, the reasons behind it are all too human and pretty cynical, actually. You had people inventing stories to make a political ruler look holy, making up claims to help sell products, like dates from a certain farm, creating narrations to slander their enemies, or just injecting their own local superstitions and cultural biases that have absolutely nothing to do with the Quran.
And if you want the absolute #1 smoking gun example of this whole reliability crisis, it's the Prophet's final sermon. I mean, this should be his clearest, most important instruction, right? But it's reported in 3 totally different, conflicting ways. One version says, follow the Quran. Another says, the Quran and my tradition. And a third says, the Quran and my relatives. These aren't just small differences. They are completely different commands. If you can't even get a straight answer on his final words, how can you trust any of the rest?
Okay, so the process itself is, well, it's a mess. But what about the stuff they actually kept? This is where the problems get even more serious, because now we're talking about direct contradictions, where these secondary books clash head-on with the theology, the science, and the morality of the Quran itself.
Right out of the gate, you slam into this massive theological wall. The Quran is crystal clear, over and over again. God is unique, unlike anything we can imagine without any physical body or human-like parts. And yet, you find a famous narration that literally describes God revealing a physical leg on Judgment Day. This isn't just a minor detail. It's a direct attack on the most fundamental belief there is, the nature of God.
And it's not just about theology. On one hand, you've got the Quran, which has verses that seem to hint at amazing scientific ideas, like the expansion of the universe. And then, on the other hand, you have lore from these traditions that talk about the earth sitting on the back of a giant whale. One sounds like divine insight, the other sounds like ancient mythology.
Then you get to the moral and ethical stuff, and honestly, it's just baffling. You find these stories that portray the Prophet as being so affected by witchcraft that he couldn't think straight, or as ordering brutal tortures. And you just have to ask yourself, how does any of that match his core description in the Quran as a mercy for all of humanity? It doesn't, not even close. And the list of bizarre and problematic claims just keeps going. Narrations that group women together with donkeys and dogs, that tell people to drink camel urine for medicine, that deny the basic science of contagious diseases, or make these really strange and degrading claims about the prophet's personal life. I mean, does any of this sound like it comes from a divine source? Or does it sound exactly like the folklore and cultural baggage of its time?
So, okay, if these secondary books are built on sand and are full of contradictions, what are we left with? Well, this is where we pivot. We move from taking things apart to building something solid, a framework for faith based on the Quran and the Quran alone as the one and only guide we need.
See, the thing is, you don't actually need to look anywhere else, because the book itself tells you everything you need to know about its own nature. It says it's complete. It calls itself Mubin, which means it's clear and self-explanatory. And it calls itself Mufasal, fully detailed. This directly challenges the whole idea that the Quran is somehow vague and needs thousands of other books to explain it.
This verse just says it all, doesn't it? The word of your Lord has been perfected. Think about that word, perfected. What can you possibly add to perfection? Nothing. This single verse anchors the whole argument that the Quran is complete. It doesn't need any human help.
And here it is. This might be the most decisive point of all. The verse says the Quran was revealed for the prophet to warn people with it and whomever it reaches. The logic here is just inescapable. If any other book, any other set of traditions was also required for guidance for every person for all time, don't you think it would have been mentioned right here? Its absence is deafening.
So when you put it all together, the shaky history, the crazy contradictions, and what the Quran says about itself, the conclusion is, well, it's unavoidable. To take any other text written and passed down by fallible human beings and raise it to the level of God's law, that's a huge theological problem. It's essentially setting up partners alongside God's one single perfected word.
And all of this leads us right here to a final, powerful choice. It's a challenging thought for sure, but it's one that a faith based on evidence demands that we face head-on.
It really just boils down to one question you have to ask yourself. Which path is built on a foundation of solid evidence, on logic, and on a text that claims its own perfection? And which path is built on a 230-year gap and a 99% rejection rate? The choice is between evidence and doubt.
Look, if this approach, this rational, evidence-first way of looking at faith, if that makes sense to you, and if it's a path you want to explore more, then please, like this explainer, share it with anyone else who might be asking these same questions, and subscribe to the channel, God Alone, Quran Alone.
Because at the end of the day, everything we've talked about leads back to one simple, clear, and honestly liberating idea: God alone, Quran alone.